Welcome back to I See a Pale Moon Rising, Nightmare Hosts Coast to Coast. My name is Kazuma Hashimoto, my pronouns are he, him, and I am a half-Japanese media, culture critic, and translator. For episode 2, I will be joined by our usual cast. Casey, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Hi, my name is Casey Crook. I am a writer, reporter, critic, and my pronouns are they, them, and I'll throw to Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Geldart. I'm a tabletop designer, writer. My pronouns are he, him, and yeah, throw to you, Mikey.
Hi, I'm Mikey. I'm a tabletop game designer, writer, critic, and podcaster, and also a graphic designer, and my pronouns are he, him.
Cool. Yeah, so today we're going to be exploring some of the history of this city of Yharnam. By doing that, we're going to literally go to what is one of the oldest parts of Yharnam, which is kind of a clue in the name there, which is Old Yharnam. So last time we came up through kind of where the game begins in Central Yharnam, and then we kind of hop forward from there to Cathedral Ward. And the cathedral was quite a large area. We'll come back here, for sure. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, but we're going to kind of zip through from Cathedral Ward, and we're going to go down to Old Yharnam, and then begin to kind of go into that area. And we read a note last time that kind of talked about it, the heathen church burning it to the ground, and we will see that those flames have not gone out. Old Yharnam still smoulders.
I think it's worth noting that we're sequence breaking here a little bit, and part of the reason for that is that we wanted to follow through on the themes that we were discussing last time, and I think naturally the way that someone would experience the game is that you would go into Cathedral Ward, and Cathedral Ward kind of is this big wheel area that sections off into a bunch of smaller areas. And so we've decided to kind of follow through and just go straight into Old Yharnam here.
Yeah. Let's go pull that lever.
Okay. Well, I mean, the lever's already pulled, but in our minds, we can imagine the lever's being pulled.
Yeah.
Just for clarification for the viewers in the audience, I'm using characters where certain areas have already been unlocked, just to make this a little bit easier, so I'm not just absolutely eating it every time we play. Because as I mentioned before, I don't build decks. So right now, it's not actually supposed to be nighttime, but in our hearts, it's always after dark.
And so Kazuma's walking through right now. The entrance to Old Yharnam is hidden. There's this very large mausoleum. It's not quite a church, but there is a sarcophagus, or at least something where someone presumably is buried, and you have to go outside and pull this lever that reveals this hidden staircase down into Old Yharnam.
Huh.
Which is a detail I really like, that the city has buried Old Yharnam, and they've kind of put this tomb over the top of it, like literally burying the past.
Yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing is when we think about dead cities, so often, like, even when you think of Pompeii, like, the entire city of Pompeii exists as a mausoleum of Pompeii, but that was of entirely natural causes. Even, like, Chernobyl, that was, even though it was caused by people, that was still, like, an accident, largely. That's probably, actually, Chernobyl is probably one of the best things to equate here, because even though it was dealing with forces beyond our control and not properly preparing for the consequences of that, you know what I mean? But even there, it's like usually when in the real world, when a city is destroyed one way or another, like, or something awful happens, like, we leave that as a monument to, like, you don't build a mausoleum over a city, You know what I mean?
No, it's absolutely wild that they've done this. This is like how they've hidden. They literally hide. It's
Yes.
literally hidden. They've hidden a city within a city.
You are.
But behind like an Indiana Jones contraption like situation.
I feel like it plays into the idea of history revisionism, right? Like to build a city on top of a city and then conceal it inside a tomb, for example. And I think, again, like, because of who made this game, like Japanese developers, I feel like history revisionism in Japanese media is often fairly poignant due to Japan's own history of history revisionism post World War II and a lot of the media that came about as a result, right? So I feel like the symbolism can go two ways. Like, oh, it's a graveyard for a city, but also burying it so deep beneath the city, inside this mausoleum. Like, how many people have actually seen it? Like, do people even know it's here? Or do they just mourn the passing of a city that's very much still there?
Do they have any idea of it having been a city, or, you know, like the knowledge of how much is true?
Yeah, this area is massive. Like as a city, like it is a massive space. Like I think compared to like kind of most like towns, this is a huge area for them to just, you know, close off and be like, well, we're not going to deal with that. And our best solution is to just ignore it and burn it and hope it doesn't bite us in the ass.
I don't like how there's chains on those statues. That unnerves me. And I think it's meant to, but the fact that, like, all of these statues have been posed, you know, above ground in this supplicant pose, almost like they're begging. Like, they don't feel statuesque. They feel like real people just out of marble. And the fact that these are chained is a lot. I also want to, because I do know this is like a point throughout the game, like even I know that there is like a sort of sky here. Maybe once Kazuma's done, you know, taking out some of the trash, we can look at the, like,
Ooh,
'cause
wow.
if a city was actually buried, you wouldn't have a sky, right? Like, and that speaks somewhat like to the video game-ness of this, but I think about, like, Knights of the Old Republic had, like, the Undercity, and that had a city that was built on top of a city, but the Undercity was on the planet's surface, and the new city was just elevated, so it was not actually a sky. And the same thing with Final Fantasy VII, like, the quote-unquote sky that you'd see was the lights on the bottom of the disc, whereas this is, like, clearly clouds, a moon. It's not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, this
yeah.
doesn't look like a place that's underground.
It's like they haven't even gone to the. I'm gonna say maybe not the word here is the right word I'm gonna use, but they've not gone to kind of the effort of demolishing the space. They have just closed the door on it. It's not even with a plan to kind of like demolish the space to like then reuse it. It is simply like closing the door and leaving it as it will. Yeah, like,
Quite literally.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's mentioned in that text that they they burned all the oil onto the ground, but clearly those, while some of those fires are still even now kind of going, it clearly didn't, you know, burn this entire area to the ground.
Yeah. If this was Fortnite and not a FromSoft game and you had your cool parachute, you could just, like, where we dropping? Old Yarnum. You know, like, it's not, like, the only humanly accessible route is closed off, but, you know, theoretically in a world where technology existed, like movement technology, then you could get here. Because I think that is a really notable thing about Bloodborne is, like, aside from carriages, like, you don't have, like, technology is stagnant. You're not trying, like, they're building more complex ways of walling things off. They're not building more complex ways to move into spaces, because that's against their own interests, right?
before we talk about, we have the benefit because we're using Kazuma's footage. There are two main things that you would encounter first in Old Yarnum. But I think before we talk about those, I think I wanted to say also that we don't know that people don't know that Old Yarnum exists. We just don't know that we don't know about it. We don't. There could be some kind of urban legend that is like, hey, you don't go to this mausoleum, you don't pull the weird lever, and you don't go down the hidden staircase. And so it's entirely possible that locals are aware of like what the deal with Old Yarnum is, and they just don't go there. And it could just be kind of a forbidden zone. It could be like Chernobyl. It could be, yeah, you just don't go there. It doesn't matter why.
That's also kind of my reading of this space, and I think when we kind of come to Cathedral Ward, there's kind of things that kind of ascertain to the population of Yarnum being complicit, or well, are complicit, but also like understand the kind of the world they live in. Maybe more than you would think would be kind of acceptable. Would be like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and we live with it.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point too. Like, you are an immigrant to this space that the people do not want to talk to you. Like, I guess I shouldn't presume what they do or do not know, because we're never party to that, right? Like, we're not the people that grew up here that had like the urban legends and had the things that are told to us in bedtime, like the common logic of the area. Like, we just don't get that because it's not our privilege to get that, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it's a city and a population which accepts and understands that this is like part of life, and has accepted the hunt as being part of daily life, has accepted that they have to basically wall off a part of the city and wherever like loved ones who live there, and just go, well, this is the way things are, and like have like come to accept it. And I think we'll kind of see more instances as we go throughout of like maybe the average citizen in Yarnum has much more knowledge than maybe we presume about like their situation they are in, but that doesn't stop them being in a predicament that they're in, and that, you know, the powers that be are also kind of manipulating that.
And I think it's also worth noting, like piggybacking off of that, that Mikey alluded to this, but the fact that they benefit from this, and it's just presumably the way that they grew up, and it's just what they're used to, and they don't think to question it. They don't think to question like, hey, there are some fucked up things about this whole situation. Should we do something about this? You know?
The answer is no.
I mean, I think that again comes with the territory of like history or visionism and what you're taught versus what's actual fact and truth, and how that can often like be obscured in this case. Like, for example, people like we don't, again, like Mikey said, we don't know if people know about Old Yarnum or not, but whether or not they know it, or even the urban legends of it, adds to that idea that the church is clearly hiding something or not giving full truths of the matter. Especially because, like, well, you didn't see the note because I've already been here. There's a note that's like, basically, ye be warned if you come in here, like that's your death sentence, right? There was an NPC that I just died to. His name is Durga. He's made it his business to protect the beasts of Old Yarnum. If I had a torch, Mikey, you would see that the beasts respond to fire in the same way that people do, and they do not want to be touched by it and will walk away from you. Yeah, because like it's this idea that, oh, like what we're fighting are just monsters, right? But that's not the whole truth of it, and the church doesn't want people to know that.
I think Jura is quite like a very interesting character and quite a sympathetic character, in that there's someone who is actually who was a hunter, who was part of the establishment of the church, and then kind of saw the light, and then has decided to make it their personal mission to protect these people who've been afflicted by kind of cursed situation that has befallen them, and we'll kind of learn more about why that has come to be, and kind of the, you know, the state's implication in that, more than implication, cause even of that. But it's really interesting coming here because, in a way, Old Yarnum is kind of an optional area. you don't have to come here.
I actually didn't come here until like the end of the game.
Yeah, and I do want to note, like, not only on the, we talked a lot about burying things in terms of history, but I do want to note, because I think, like, talking about cultural imperialism is super important and super relevant to this game. But just from my own knowledge, I do want to note, like, I don't know how many people have heard of the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, but the Catholic Church actually literally buried women and like content warning, for abuse of women and stuff like that. I'm not going to go too deep, but just in case folks want to be warned. But they took essentially like undesirable women, so women who were pregnant out of wedlock, who had developmental disabilities, any kind of like STD, whether it was, their fault or not, and kind of forced them into these like work prison camps. And that was like a secret. It was just something that you didn't talk about, and so many people did not know that was a thing until they were eventually disbanded. I think the last one was shut down in like 1994. So it's not even like ancient history, and I myself didn't even know that as an American until taking a class on Indian and Irish film and like film and culture post-colonialism, looking specifically at those two as English colonies. And I didn't realize the level of things that the Catholic Church has and continues to cover up. I mean, there's even more things that are more prevalent in our own time, but that I think speaks to something where it's like, in those cases, these like nunnery type buildings, these laundries were erected to literally hide women and to kind of plaster over metaphorically and literally the shame of it.
I also want to say, like, as someone who's English, kind of mentioning Ireland, it's important to say, like, empires are very good at hiding their history and their misdeeds, and like, so I'm an English citizen, I'm an English person, but like, kind of the empire, the legacy of empire and kind of the damage and kind of like hurt that like my own government and like country has done to others isn't something like what he talked about, is like in a way effectively hidden. Like, if you ask most people in England about like kind of the treatment of the Irish or kind of the others and kind of the other colonies around the world, there's not that much knowledge because the state has like engendered such kind of a has curated the conversations to be that those questions don't get raised. And kind of that brings us back to kind of Yarn, which we have a situation which is like information is like heavily controlled. Resources are heavily controlled in the city. And ultimately, like the church, Healing Church, really is like the only one power in this place.
Something that's very explicit in the game is that the everyday people that we meet know that you just don't go out during a hunt. And if you're outside during a hunt, then it sucks. And it's dangerous. But we do know that there are a lot of ordinary people that come out on a hunt. Technically, at this point in the game, we're not supposed to know why or how that happened. But from that first area, we know that the everyday people know that there's something weird that happens, and they probably don't question it. And they probably just say, okay, we lock your doors, and if you're outside, it sucks.
They have learned to live with it in the worst way possible, in that they cannot or do not do anything to like change that.
This is massively shifting gears, but one thing that strikes me about Old Yarnum is that there aren't the gates. There aren't massive like ways for the for Old Yarnum to like divide itself into pieces. It's I guess kind of self-referential to say it, but this feels like a Dark Souls level. This could be a Dark Souls level. It's just a large kind of sprawling castle area. And if there wasn't a man on a clock tower shooting a Gatling gun at you, it could just as easily be inhabited by everyday ghosts as it is people that used to live here.
I think if we go down to the lower streets, I think we can kind of really see, like, if we think about when we went through, like, central kind of Yharnam, like, where we first began the game, there really isn't, like, the same level of, the ability of the area to triage itself, which kind of speaks to, like, the lessons they learn in this space that they've then applied to rebuilding. Yeah, so kind of, like, looking at the buildings here, there is a real difference in terms of, like, the design of this kind of space and this architecture. The thing I pull on mostly for this area are they called lean-tos? These kind of like these wooden roofs over this kind of street.
Like an awning or a patio, almost.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it feels much more Mediterranean, and it's much more horizontally focused. It's not as vertically focused.
I think it's important to note that this is a video game space, and you can't get up on that awning. That is not like a platform that you crawl up on. That's not something that enemies jump down at you from. That is just something that adds to the impact that maybe some people needed to be shielded from rain sometimes here. It's something that makes it feel so... It's something so small and makes it feel so lived in, I think.
Yeah, well, and then like too, so you have that wooden lean-to, but then you also have these iron brackets over windows, and you have these, you know, levers and pulleys like holding bodies. So, you know, we're seeing like several generations of architecture here, right? Of like, oh, we built this, you know, for a purpose, and then we built the stone, and then we built wood on top of it one time just to, you know, kind of get something in there. But then when things started getting really heavy, we needed to put iron on the stone structures to protect ourselves from these beasts. So
You can, yeah, totally. You can kind of see how, like, this space kind of first built as a normal space we kind of recognize in kind of historic European cities, especially like Eastern European, as I said before. Then this case of, okay, well, we have this problem, let's begin to adapt to it. And then clearly we kind of see, like, throughout kind of coming into later, like, these adaptations aren't enough, and then they end up having to, you know, abandon this area and then build gates and stuff. I mention this quickly because we kind of come past all these, like, a very like dense area of statues just in front of this cathedral.
yeah, and we're seeing like two generations of statues too, right? Like we're seeing more of like the, you know, we're most commonly see them in like Greco-Roman statuary, where it's like almost like prophet, like the people are very like solid and straight up and down and very tall, and like most of the taller older statues are of men, but there's some women as well. But then yeah, thank you, Kazuma. So like you see these taller statues where people are much bigger, and then like almost like more desperate wretches of like more modern statues like we've seen in other parts of the city beneath them. And like the taller statues of, you know, of these like prophet like figures are all broken down.
So it's also interesting that these are all here like in front of this. If we go into, I don't know if you've defeated the boss here, if you're able to look at the statue in the interior, but basically we are kind of on the outskirts of what is essentially a burned out church, burned out cathedral. And it's interesting to me that all of these statues are placed in front of it, which to me kind of reads as maybe they went in and took out this artwork, took out these like, important statues, with like that there was a process to, well, let's take out the architecture and then burn the cathedral, which is like a kind of a strange process for. Was there a plan, you know, initially to try and save parts of this, like part of the history to culture, before they ended up just, you know, abandoning it?
I think too there's the space that is empty right in front of the cathedral that has a lot of burned bodies, and so I think it's reasonable to assume, similar to the Odin graveyard, that this was a graveyard right around here. there are a lot of like mournful figures, and there are actually not that many statues out here. So I think it's entirely reasonable that a lot of these would have been made as gravestones or tombstones or things like that.
Yeah, and the chain that helps me kind of understand like the chains around them. Like you see that before you could know why, but now thinking about it, like they probably changed those statues like in universe. It's not so spooky. It's like they chain them to move them. How do you move like marble and granite? You know?
Hmm. There's also something that I noticed recently because I was playing the medium for work. There's actually a Polish artist, I believe, who draws crosses in this style. His art is, I feel like maybe that might reference it in relation to how this game pulls from various European aesthetics instead of just having people tied to the more familiar iconography that we associate with crosses. I'm wondering if that had some aesthetic or influence to the decision they made regarding that.
So I just was able to find. So it's actually called a Tau cross, which is a T-shaped cross, or a St. Anthony's cross, and the name given to it because of its association with St. Anthony of Egypt.
Oh, interesting.
So it is something that's used throughout. Like, it's not just like an Eastern Roman thing or anything like that, but it does have like an association with like certain kinds of sainthood.
It all goes back to Catholicism.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should definitely. This is original. If you want to look up here, the burned out ceiling of this place, and what I really like, once you kind of move closer towards that statue, and we see what the statue is looking at, we can see how the kind of the thought put into this area of like whether it was intentionally like the history of this space. It was looking up just at the ceiling of the area. We can see now how this statue is kind of, as we approach it, kind of going to get more into it, but like it's looking up at that great bridge. It's looking up at that bridge where we encountered the cleric beast.
I think another thing that I'm thinking about a lot is that statues as physical objects have to be made. It feels kind of silly to say, but the idea that obviously in a video game you can just make an asset and kind of copy paste around, but this statue in particular is a feminine looking figure holding a person wrapped up in bandages, and it has two other attendants next to it. They're clearly like working on this person that is clearly very ill. And then immediately in front of the statue, or at least underneath the statue, on the foot of the statue, there are all kinds of these other mournful figures that almost is kind of reminiscent of a Sea of Dead kind of situation. And then in front of the statue are two figures that look like a boss that you presumably would have fought at this point in the game already. And they kind of have these bandages hanging off of them. These figures that are clearly like ailed and being transformed, it gives us such a like snapshot of subtle history that statues take a long time to make, and they take a lot of resources to make, especially statues as detailed as the ones in this game.
I was going to say, like, it's kind of interesting the statues, like, and this being one of the, presumably one of the first churches for the Healing Church. These aren't just figures of people in a sense that is about classical beauty. They aren't striving for a typical beauty, if that makes sense. These aren't statues which are about the saintliness or the beauty of people. They really are kind of speaking to their own unique thing.
Yeah.
These are not like artworks of exaltation at all.
Or if they are, they're not in a way that we would normally recognize or to relate to.
They're definitely about like striving. They're definitely about like working through something, and especially with them looking at the great bridge that is supposed to lead us to the cathedral ward, to where presumably we would get help if we were afflicted in such a way. And it kind of has this dark irony, and it is such a great snapshot. It's such a great capstone to this area of decay and ruin and neglect.
Yeah, because you have to imagine before, the church completely collapsed, like the physical building, it wouldn't have, and that bridge wouldn't have been built yet because this is old Yarnum. So, that's more a like thematic thing, but maybe the bridge was built on purpose to, like, since it was built later, like you could think of it like that, of knowing where that statue is pointing.
I think it's also interesting to think about, well, why would you build this first city in this ravine? Why is it so deep, and why is it not higher up? Normally you kind of build a city at a vantage point, but why was this first city built so deep into a ravine? And there's an item we pick up here when you first visit, the Thumiri Chalice. That has some special purposes, especially for hunters, and it mentions a attachment to kind of the deepest parts of history of the city, which maybe speaks to why old Yarnum was built not on the sides of a ravine, but right in the middle of it, right deep down as far as it could be, and what it is close to.
Can I just read what the item description for the, like, when you would examine the Thumiri Chalice is?
Go for it.
Ritual chalice found in the Church of the Good Chalice. So that's what the name of that building is. Used in a ritual at the tomb altar in the Hunter's Dream to break the seal of the old underground labyrinth. Let the chalice reveal the tomb of the gods. Let blood be the hunter's nourishment. And let ye partake in communion.
I love it so much. They find this old fucking labyrinth, this thing, and they have this like item that links them directly to it, and so they build a city off of that. They're like, well, let's build the city as close as possible to this. The city is like cursed from its very beginning, like from the city's inception. It's kind of doomed to be where it is at now.
And the curse has seeped into its architecture, like literally and figuratively.
As they begin to deal with it and try to deal with it, and then fail again, and then seem to have for a time in Central Yarnum and Cathedral Ward have dealt with it, and then that again falls apart.
Yeah.
Before I die, you might not have seen it, but all of these people effectively were praying to this thing. And this is the figure of a boss that was in the big chapel.
Yeah. It's flayed and it's got its blood dripping from it. And it's almost in like, so typically when like the body of Christ is depicted, he has like, or, it being a body, has like the feet bound up and the arms raised, and that beast is almost in that same posture, and the skin has been flayed off to let the blood drip down. And the chalice says, let the blood be the hunter's nourishment, and let ye partake in communion. Communion is, in the Catholic conception, consuming the body and blood of Christ. And in a chalice, in a goblet, you'd consume the blood, which is like wine transmogrified. So, in their mind, these people that were praying to that are literally going to drink the blood of this beast.
And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that this is a ritual, like, in the mundane sense, that these people, presumably, even though they've lost themselves to this beasthood or whatever this plague is, they still go to church, and they still stand in rows and pray and partake in communion.
Well, you think about dogs. Like, dogs are like creatures of habit. Like, my dog knows when 7 o'clock is. He knows it when 7 o'clock. Like, we all finish with work now because we're all working from home. Like, we go up, we get him his stuff. I can't say it because he's in the room with me and he will activate. We get him, like, he gets a treat before dinner, a special treat. And like, then we eat. And like, dogs are creatures of ritual and habit. If you break the ritual and habit, then they like lose all sense of like what's going on and get very confused. So like, I think that like they're beastly, but like even beasts have a sense of schedule and like what you do and don't need to do, right?
Yeah. I think BC is the key word here. They're not monsters. They're viewed and seen as monsters and perceived as monsters, but really they are like they still have these kind of rituals, as you say.
I think to note on Beasthood, this game kind of works on a scale of Beasthood and another thing that we'll get into later, and it has some potentially ableist and othering implications of people being more beast-like and being more mundane or prone to manipulation or things like that. And I just wanted to like note that up front that there is kind of an idea of being more quote unquote intelligent or quote unquote beast-like or more or less humane in some way or another is very important thematically to this game.
Absolutely. This game is like we're kind of calling it cosmic horror as like kind of the general term, but obviously, assuming most people can listen to this, will kind of know about like Lovecraft as being kind of
A racist and a xenophobe.
yeah, exactly right, being the cornerstone of this genre, it being about like otherness, about othering others, about like perceptions of cultures you deem to be barbaric or inhuman or disgusting.
Or even things within yourselves, like things within like the society that you live in being like, I mean, you use the word like quite literally barbaric, and those things being things that we should push out or things that we should move away from for some reason. But those things being not something that necessarily comes from outside our culture, but are kind of throughout. And yeah.
Yeah, and just to reiterate again, like Kazuma was saying, hey, fuck Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Just absolutely fuck Lovecraft.
I feel like this game works like against I guess more or less the leanings of Lovecraft, right? Because on the nature of beast, I don't want to spoil anything, but the people who are becoming beasts are the people who live in a xenophobic society that don't welcome outsiders. They've effectively stolen something from a very long gone group of people, consume it, and have become beasts themselves. So I feel like it has some commentary to offer in that way, which I feel like we can discuss at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as we see more of kind of the game's world and kind of more of like, I don't know how nuanced we can say like this game's like take on the work of Lovecraft and cosmic horror is, but there's certainly some nuance and like kind of it is in conversation with those kind of things.
I think at least in Old Yarnum it is a good like introduction to this thing, because Old Yarnum, the actual structure of it is much more traditional horror. You have things jumping out at you, you have monsters screaming, you have like different things, but underneath the layer of it all there is this cause that there is something wrong in the bones of this place, that there is something that someone like somewhere way back in history messed something up and messed with things that they shouldn't have, and it kind of doomed and cursed everyone. There's just this feeling throughout, and there is this feeling of institutional crimes and institutional violence that just pervade every sense of this area, and complicity, and like we've hit on a lot, that rituals are built around that institutional violence, and rituals are built around the institutional crimes in so much that they become muscle memory. They become we've lost our personality, we've lost our ability to communicate through anything other than violence, but we go partake communion.
And that was our second episode of I See a Pale Moon Rising. I'm not, you know what? That's it. That's the title. Nightmare Coast from Host to Host. Thank you for coming on this amazing journey with us through through Old Yarnum. Once again, my name is Kazuma Hashimoto. You can find me at JusticeKazi_ on Twitter, or you can find me at JusticeKazi on Twitch.
My name is Casey Crook. You can find me at Casey Crook on Twitter.
My name is Christian Galdart. You can find me at Twitter on at Chris_Galdart.
And I've been Mikey Z. You can find me on Twitter at quantum and you can find my other podcast, Match Club, at Match Club Pod on Twitter.
Great, thank you everyone. Oh, we should do our little laughs again.
Okay, in 3, 2.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I hope
Okay.
to see you
Thank you.
next time.
We'll see you next time. All right.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.